So hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome. This is Ramola D from Ramola D Reports, and I'm here this afternoon with a very special guest. This is Dr. Len Ber, and he is formerly an MD from the former USSR, where he practiced for several years, 8 years I understand, as a specialist in endocrinology. When he came to the US in the 1990s, he came to work for a pharmaceutical company. He's now a naturalized US citizen, and he's worked in the regulatory field in the food industry, I understand, in the Chicago area for about 14 years. But Dr. Len Ber has a very interesting story to tell us that's part of his life experience, but also part of an experience that is now affecting millions of people in the USA and around the world. I learned about Dr. Len Ber on Twitter recently when I was tweeting about the so-called quote-unquote Havana Syndrome conference that was recently held online, and it was held at a university, I understand, and it invited various physicians, specialists, military neuroweapon makers such as Dr. James Giordano, etc., to come and give their opinions about the current DEW attacks, which have been labeled Havana Syndrome by the CIA and the Department of State people who are reporting these attacks. So this was a Havana Syndrome conference. And in the course of looking at these tweets, I discovered that there was a civilian whose question had been answered at the conference, talking about these DEW attacks on civilians. So since this was the very first time such information has actually been published in a public conference, I was super interested and tried to pursue this further. And this is how I came across Dr. Len Ber's presence on Twitter and his disclosures, which we have exchanged a few notes about and which I hope we can speak about today. So I think it's going to be a very interesting afternoon. First of all, welcome, Dr. Ber. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me, Ramola.
You're very welcome. As you know, your tweets have excited a lot of interest, not just in me, but a lot of people who are following the story, and indeed many people, in the US in particular, who are reporting that they are being hit with directed energy weapons in their own homes, as I think we are going to speak more about today.
That's true. My attacks started in 2019 at my residence. I live with my family in the suburbia, in about an hour away from Chicago, where my work is, and as a physician, as a former physician, well, once a physician, always a physician, I was absolutely stumbled by these directional sounds and the sense of vibration and tinnitus and the how sudden it starts and how distinctly it feels, because once somebody who experiences directed energy attacks, there's nothing like it. And I'm here to speak as a patient diagnosed with Havana Syndrome by Dr. Hoffer of the University of Miami, and as a physician. So it's really a unique experience that subjectively it feels very different as anything else, any other conditions. To make the story short, so this started in 2019, and
Can I interrupt and just ask you a couple of things? You see, it started in 2019. Did this just happen out of the blue? Did anything precede the sudden occurrence of first being hit with directed energy weapons? And, I'd love to ask you to describe a little bit further, because it seems to me as a physician, you would have the tools to more clearly describe for many of us how, as you say, the experience of this differed from the experience of something else, the experience, for instance, of any kind of endogenously rising illness.
Right. So the sound is directional. That alerted me because if you tell somebody you hear sound and I'm on sound, I include also human voices. When you tell that to somebody, the first or to a doctor, to a psychiatrist, obviously a doctor would suggest some kind of form of delusion. But I'm familiar with how paranoid schizophrenia develops. If you haven't developed it by your mid-20s, basically that's not it. And then the directionality of the sound, it's coming from somewhere. I mean, it puzzled me so much.
It's external.
External, correct. And then the ringing, the tinnitus is very, very high pitch. It sounds like an electronic buzz more than ringing. And it comes and goes. It kind of whooshes over you and then stays. Then it stays in your head, and it's very unpleasant. And then the sense of vibration, that your head vibrates, your body vibrates, and there's just nothing like it. I asked people around me, "Do you feel it?" And nobody said, "No, I don't feel it."
And people around you didn't feel it. Is this when you were standing or sitting? What was the exact circumstance?
I don't remember what I was standing. And the vibration started. It felt like my whole body vibrates, and I was looking for an external source, and I said, does anybody else feel it? And no, nobody else feels it, and it felt so different from anything else I've ever experienced. And what a patient with some kind of neurological disorder, maybe like a migraine or a Parkinson's, it feels different. So directionality, the high pitched tinnitus, the sudden onset, the vibration. This is what puzzled all those physicians that said this is a distinct syndrome that we've never seen before. And then on top of it, then you have a sudden onset of dizziness, mental fog, disorientation. You can't. You're holding the walls. You're having a hard time maintaining balance. So all that together puzzled me a lot. And then I started looking into what could have been happening. And by December of 2019, it escalated to the point that I had convulsions. So these vibrations were escalating, and I had convulsions without losing consciousness. So it was not epilepsy. I ended up in the emergency room. I took a month off work to completely investigate everything, do every possible scan and blood work, and see every specialist, and nobody could find anything except elevated calcium, which by the way is typical for directed energy attack.
How interesting.
And so my doctors were investigating it, and they were completely clueless, and I did my own investigation, including seeing a psychiatrist, because that is one of the things that prevents people like myself coming forward with these symptoms and complaints. Because once you say you're hearing sounds that nobody else hears, and you're hearing voices, a diagnosis of paranoid
schizophrenia, schizo disorder, those kinds of things.
Yeah, this is an easy diagnosis to make. So I have a very smart clinical psychiatrist who absolutely rejected the idea of paranoid schizophrenia. Like the nobody develops it at the age of 54,
How
and,
brilliant. What a very smart guy.
absolutely. And I also educated him about my findings. And so my diagnosis with my psychiatrist is adjustment disorder. So I am
Hmm.
experiencing, I'm adjusting to whatever's been done to me. And one of the adjustments that we had to make is to put me on some very strong combination of sleep medicine, because sleep disruption is one of the things that's happening to people
That's
assaulted
true.
with energy. So,
Mhm.
and I'm seeing psychiatrists on a regular basis. We have a good relationship. He having that in my back pocket allowed me to speak publicly about other things, and I highly recommend everybody who is experiencing it to educate your psychiatrist, to seek a psychiatrist who doesn't just slap a delusional disorder once you describe the symptoms, that somebody who is really does their homework. There's still good psychiatrists out there, and
That's
my
wonderful.
perfect is example.
That's wonderful news and information, and very unusual to hear this, actually, Dr. Bear, because I have to tell you, I've interviewed so many people, I've read so many reports, and I just know of so many cases at this point where what typically happens when people report this kind of thing is the family ends up calling a psychiatrist or a doctor, or there's some kind of incident and the police show up. And, the police take people to a psych ward through this kind of 72-hour hold, etc., that they do, and some kind of community mental health intervention. And what happens is the people who are reporting these DU attacks then get wrongfully misdiagnosed as psychiatric cases, having a psychotic episode, being schizophrenic, schizoid, etc. And that's on their record and their
Mhm.
medical records. So then after that, nobody listens to them, nobody hears them, nobody gives them the medical help that they need. So, I mean, this is such a crucial subject. So, your suggestion is there are some good psychiatrists out there, but people would have to work hard to find them. And then the question becomes, well, why does anybody need to find a psychiatrist when it's a physical attack, literally, right? It's an energy attack, an energy weapon
Correct.
attack.
Correct. And then we should be talking about how to properly diagnose it. But
Okay. Yeah.
let's talk about that when we talk about the conference.
Okay.
Uh, what happened next? So I received a diagnosis of adjustment disorder, not schizophrenia, not delusional disorder, and I continued my research, and I came across the case of human embassy workers returned from Cuba, diagnosed with Dr. Hoffer, found his paper, found his contact, got a referral, flew myself to Miami to, spoke to him first, spent a day doing nothing but vestibular tests, and Dr. Hoffer um, told me that he gave me the same diagnosis basically that he gave to the embassy workers. His diagnosis is based on the vestibular damage that directed energy produces. And this is not like a mild damage. We're talking about severe irreversible damage of the vestibular organs. Like on one of my sides, in the up and down axis, I have 100% irreversible damage. So that function is gone. It's been fried. It's been damaged, and the diagnosis clearly says that this is a vestibular disorder, or as he also put the name of his article in my diagnosis. It's called acquired neurosensory dysfunction. That's the name of his 2018 article that he published based on his him examining U.S. embassy workers returned from Havana. This is what he did for the Department of State. So he gave me the same diagnosis. He said, this is the kind of damage that you see with directed energy. So this is my diagnosis from Dr. Hoffer. And his diagnosis is based on the vestibular damage. And of course, there are other things that people use to diagnose. They do the DTI, this functional MRI, and I did that too. I came to my neurologist back in Chicago. We did that. I could not get anybody at the University of Pennsylvania to look at my DTI because it was like they did the study. They also did it for the Department of State, and they absolutely refused to take me as a patient. So this sort of differential treatment, if you're a federal worker, we will investigate your case. We will assign you a treatment. We will do all kinds of things for you. But if you're a civilian with the same diagnosis, there's just silence, and that is wrong. This differential treatment has to stop. This is because civilians are affected by this directed energy. It is a public safety issue. And so when you see a report from the director of national intelligence and the CIA, like in February 2nd of this year, and they said they confirmed, yes, Havana Syndrome is due to directed energy. And then there was a section on detectors, and the whole section is blocked out. That is wrong because they don't want us to know how to diagnose, because this is only for the diplomats and for the spy. And but the public, we're going to treat differently, and that is absolutely wrong. And that the fact that this is not front page news, and there are no investigative journalists besides you, Ramola, even asking these questions, this is just simply wrong and unacceptable.
First of all, Dr. Ber, thank you for disclosing this very, very important and major information. If I can just summarize, basically, you've been diagnosed with vestibular damage, actual vestibular damage by Dr. Hoffer, in exactly the same way as these other guys, the diplomats and spies, have been diagnosed, right? The same kinds of bioeffect on their bodies from experiencing whatever energy attacks they suffered. The same thing. And but they refused. Who is it exactly who refused to look at your DTI and to take it on board?
Everybody at University of Pennsylvania. So the group of Dr. Douglas Smith. There's a brain laboratory that did this study, looking at the DTIs of Havana Syndrome patients, and they published it in JAMA. It's sort of controversial because they said what we found is we think it's a brain damage, but it might be just individual variations. Nevertheless, the findings were significant. So I wanted them to look at my DTI, and nobody at the University of Pennsylvania, at the laboratory of Professor Smith, they literally refused to take me on as a patient because I'm not a federal worker, because I don't work for the Department of State. this is so wrong. This is
Absolutely.
absolutely out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will definitely report on this when I report on this interview. And because it needs to be put in an article and seen widely by people around the world. This is not just, discriminatory treatment. It is inexplicable. It is confusing for people. This is our own government doing this, right? Why would civilians be prevented from being studied as well? Just as much as the other people are who are reporting it. That's one big thing. And then the other thing is you're reporting that in this report. And are you talking about the, gosh, I don't know who exactly produced the report. Was it the University of Pennsylvania that produced the report that has
published
these
published
redacted portions?
published in JAMA. I think it's a 2018 or 2019 paper of Smith, Verma,
Okay, that
one,
one. Yeah,
one, both,
one of
both.
those. Yes.
Yeah.
So all the information on detectors, you said, now this is what I wanted to actually emphasize because it's so remarkable. The information on detectors, which is being provided, you say, to the Department of State and the CIA, so that anyone there can make use of this information, that is being
Correct.
redacted?
The unclassified version. So there's a declassified version has been released to the public, at least the executive summary, and it has sections on various aspects of their findings. They confirm, just like National Academy of Science, they said that the most plausible explanation is directed pulsed radio frequency energy in the microwave range. And then there's a section on detectors. And in the entire section, the only word you can read is detectors. Everything else is blocked out. This
Wow.
is what they want the public that suffers from it to know about how to detect these attacks correctly.
This is very, very important. I'm going to, more closely. I know I have all of these PDFs. The National Science Foundation, I think, put out a report, etc. But I haven't read them very closely, and it seems like I certainly need to. And we need to point up what exactly is being reported. So, boy, I think this is huge. And then the other thing that you are reporting is that you had brought your story actually to a few journalists, but nobody's picked it
Yeah,
up.
absolutely. I literally wrote and contacted every person who has ever written a single word about Havana Syndrome. And I got some responses. People like Greg Meyer, asked me basically, um, he asked me, who do you think is doing it to you? And I said, what an unfair question. I'm not doing it to myself. I want my government to investigate it. And so we will all know who is doing it and how he's doing it. Sorry, low battery. So I had a conversation with Nick Shafrin from NPR. I had a conversation with some producers in NPR. I contacted everything. So we would have a conversation, or we would have an exchange, and then things would go quiet, because the fact that it's happening to civilians is like a it's a subject that cannot be touched and brought to the public awareness. I don't know what the mechanism, why nobody is reporting it, but now that it's been acknowledged by Dr. Giordano, when I asked him a very direct question, and he answered very directly, for the first time, as far as I know, because in his article, he's hypothetically, he acknowledges, yeah, perhaps there's some civilians that are suffering from it, but we need to do, they need to be diagnosed and observed and everything. Well, I asked him that specific question, and I identify myself as somebody who has been diagnosed with this condition, not by just a neurologist or other neurologist, by Dr. Hoffer, who diagnosed the embassy workers. And for the first time, he actually acknowledged it. So now we have a
Yes,
neuro
this is huge. This is absolutely huge.
acknowledging existence of civilian cases, and we have a media that ignores that fact like it doesn't even exist. If if members of the general public, and I'm nobody, I don't hold any state secrets. I'm basically just a regular Joe Schmo. And if it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. So this is a matter of public safety. Dr. Giordano, love his work, love his style. He's a brilliant man. His bioethic position, when he talks about bioethics with respect to neuroweapons, here's the framework he uses. He says, yes, this is beyond possibility. This is reality, and all you doctors should know that this is reality. And the doctor said, yes, of course, yeah, but we like it's a very lukewarm response. So he emphasizes that this is a reality. Okay. But the framework he uses, he said, in terms of bioethics, should we say the sky is falling? He called it the Chicken Little response. Or are we crying wolf? And the answer is somewhere in between. Well, let me tell you, Dr. Giordano, this is a wrong framework. This is the use of directed energy weapons against civilians is nothing but a gross violation of every human right. It's a violation of Geneva Convention. It's nothing. It cannot be described by anything by a word less than a torture. So the framework we should be using, what comes to mind, there's a famous poem by Martin Niemöller when he said, first they came for the socialists and I did not stand up because I was not a socialist, and then they came for the Jews and I didn't speak out because I was not a Jew, and then they came for me and there was nobody else left to speak up for me. This is the right framework. A use of neuroweapons against a single civilian is a use of neuroweapons on all civilians. This is the only moral framework that we should adopt.
Absolutely. And thank you for spelling it out. And I hope at some point that Dr. Giordano will have a chance to watch this interview and hear your words, because indeed there's so much that so many of us would like to say to him. And, I certainly have been watching his videos, as you have, his lectures that he's been giving at various places. And people who don't know who Dr. James Giordano is, he's both a military neuroscientist and he's the head of neuroethics at Georgetown University. And he's been doing a lot of disclosure. He seems to be on the lecture circuit, both, of course, in the military world, at all these military colleges, the War College and whatnot. But he also does lectures at universities such as Georgetown, talking about different aspects of both neuroscience and the state of the art in terms of weaponized neurotechnology. And literally from him, and also from Dr. Robert Duncan, whose work you probably know, I think we've all learned that at this point, the brain has been completely understood by these neuroscientists and military neuroscientists. And it's also being manipulated, it's being modified, it's being attacked with neuroweapons because they've figured out how to attack the brain using different kinds of technologies, whether they are optical imaging technologies or ultrasonic or whatever. They've got a whole range, right? So certainly, Dr. Giordano has brought to us a lot of knowledge about the state-of-the-art neurotechnology today. But the thing that he is missing and the thing that media is missing is this particular component, Dr. Ber, that you are bringing forward, that the stories of civilians, the reports of civilians is being disappeared out of sight. And I should actually just make one comment about the media over there. It's interesting the media never spoke to you and did not want to publish your story as a Havana Syndrome reporter, because that's the term that's coming now from the federal government, Havana Syndrome. Now, prior to that, people did not have that term, but people would report energy attacks, energy weapon attacks, and neurotechnology attacks. Media has been covering it for the last 20 years, as far as I can tell, maybe longer, as an anomaly, an aberration, as craziness, as mysterious, as bizarre. These are the terms they use, and as a psychiatric problem, as not to be believed. These people who are reporting this are not to be believed. This is how media has reported it, which is a very government-aligned stand, when at the same time, we have information from government documents. They've been studying this technology for a very long time. And now we've got Dr. Giordano, Dr. Duncan, indeed whistleblowing about it and telling us, yes, this information, this is all true. These weapons exist, and they're being studied. In fact, in this conference that you were at, Dr. Baird, that I heard a little bit of a replay of, Dr. Giordano makes the statement that at this point in time, neurotechnology is being studied, it's being researched, it's being tested, it's being operated. And he means the weapons, right? He means the neurotech weapons. So is that what's happening, do you think, in this country as well?
I don't want to speculate. I understand the gravity of the situation. I think this is not my place to make this hypothetical pronouncement. What I'm afraid is that the use of neural weapons against population has been normalized. We're getting used to it. Like the first time this information has become available, we should have just say time out. This is an emergency. I think this is the issue that will literally change the course of human history, of us as species, because the brain is who we are as people. This defines our humanity, and we are so nonchalant about it that we even dismiss in these cases, diagnosed cases among civilians. This is a normalization of this technology. That's what I'm afraid of.
But it cannot happen. They can't normalize it. I mean, what's happening right now, it's very interesting. You asked a military neuroscientist who's worked for the CIA and the US Department of Defense. You asked him whether this weaponry was being used on civilians. What exactly did you ask him? Did you want to tell us exactly what you asked?
So my exact question was, what steps would you recommend to a civilian diagnosed with the same condition by Dr. Hoffer as the embassy workers? So somebody who has a diagnosed case of Havana Syndrome.
We have a question. What steps would you recommend for civilian patients who've been given diagnoses similar to those of embassy personnel by Dr. Hoffer and his group in Miami?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And I must tell you, I receive a number of emails and a number of correspondences from individuals who have reports in which they're reporting certainly symptoms and in some cases validated signs. I think what becomes very, very important is for them to seek clinical assistance, seek clinical aid, first and foremost. Why? Well, clearly they're suffering, something is wrong, find out what is wrong. That also helps to provide objective evidence that there are dysfunctional parameters and abnormalities, which would then be important to feed, if you will, up the chain. So these could then be further evaluated. And there are a number of evaluative programs, as we know, operative right now in the United States, into which that information would then be uptaken. So the individuals might then progress into the verification and validation pipelines.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're going
to... And what he suggested is more medical observation, not investigation, not a let's go and find out what's going on. And these my attacks are ongoing. I just had an hour ago, I was literally just holding the walls. This is it happens to me on a daily basis. Um, and what Dr. Giordano suggested, well, more medical observation. No, this is a criminal activity and it has to be investigated, and our government has to protect us from these attacks. This is a 21st century problem, and saying that, oh, we just don't know what it is. This is just, it doesn't cut it. Nobody believes it, that the United States, with its unlimited military budget and unlimited counterintelligence and God knows what, and technologically the most advanced country in the world, does not know what is happening with Havana Syndrome. This is just laughable. And the journalists that don't ask these questions, they're simply not doing their job. Quite honestly, I lost respect for them.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I think many of us have lost faith with mainstream journalism as it stands today. It doesn't seem to be doing anything except propping up a lot of pharmaganda and, from the pharmaceutical industry, and government ganda, I suppose, from the departments of the government. Indeed, what you are pointing to, Dr. Ber, is very significant. You are basically saying that the Department of Defense and our intelligence agencies have at this point gotten to such a point of sophistication in terms of their weaponry that we all know these weapons exist. And they've been developed, they've been researched, they've been tested, they've been operated. And as Giordano mentions himself, this testing and operation goes on. So the question becomes, well, who are they testing and operating on? I mean, who is going to lend themselves to being hit with neuroweapons? Nobody, right? So it seems to me there's a trail of crumbs over here that we can't quite ignore. But our classified parties like Dr. Giordano are trying very hard to get the world to ignore it, through multiple redactions and talking. I think he made a comment in response to your question as well about some things being classified and how people just need to go to the doctors and then travel up the chain of verification and validation is how he worded it. So, and what you are saying as a doctor is, no, the point is not to just see this as a medical situation, but see it as a situation of national defense, public safety, right?
Public safety, exactly.
And human rights, because people are being hit with energy weapons, they're literally being assaulted. I have come to use the term assault and battery, which is a term from law. It's a crime. Assault and battery is a crime, right? You can't just go and cudgel your neighbor with a baseball bat. That's physical assault. But if you had an energy weapon and sat in the basement of your house and pointed it up at your neighbor, isn't that also physical assault and battery? You're hitting them physically?
Well, physically is a loaded term. I had multiple conversations with neurologists who maintain this logic that, for example, my neurologist actually diagnosed me with traumatic encephalopathy without the physical trauma. But a lot of neurologists maintain that you have to have a concussion, that you have you have to have a mechanical damage to your head that damages your brain, and then we can talk about trauma. Well, not in the 21st century, not anymore. Brain injury can be done remotely, completely, without knowing who is doing it to you. This is a 21st technological situation, and the doctors who are not up to that level, they're just bad doctors. They're really literally bad doctors. The doctors who say, one of the questions that I asked, they were talking about vestibular migraine and triple PED, which is persistent postural dizziness, they all could be manifestation of Havana syndrome. So the question I asked, how would you differentiate all these conditions from a directed energy attacks?
Mm-hmm.
And the only logical answer to that is you have to use detectors during the attack. We have not heard from anybody, from any report, or no journalist asked this question, has energy been measured during the attack? They said we use detectors, but nobody actually clearly stated we detected energy during the attack. Well,
That's really interesting.
I'm diagnosed with Havana syndrome. I have ongoing attacks on a daily basis. Investigate. Don't tell the public that you will get to the bottom of things, because this is, excuse my French, this is total bullshit. If you wanted to know, you would investigate my case before you investigate, cases that ended several years ago. And there are people, yes, they're suffering from this post-traumatic, post-directed energy attacks, but
Mm-hmm.
here's a case that everybody, every agency knows about. And because we made sure, I actually worked with the Senator Duckworth's office. She's my U.S. senator. I have a caseworker who has been pushing for investigating, contacted every agency. And at this moment, a year and a half later, after I received my diagnosis, and I knocked on every door, every official, and we had a Senator Duckworth filed an inquiry with the FBI, because supposedly FBI is the agency that's supposed to investigate domestic cases. Still no investigation is
that,
we
that explains a lot, actually.
yeah, Senator Duckworth received a literally a nonsensical response from the FBI. I filed personally 3 complaints. I provided all my diagnosis and the language. If I read this letter, you will laugh, because it literally means nothing. So FBI sweeps it under the rug, and every other official says, we will get to the bottom of things. Well, we don't believe you, because you are not doing it, because you know about my case, you know it's been diagnosed, you know it's been confirmed, you know it's ongoing, and you are not investigating. Prove us, prove to us that you really want to get to the bottom of things.
Well, I think it's also proof to us that they are involved. And I know you don't want to speculate, but this is a subject I've been following for a very long time. And I can tell you that the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice, which involves the FBI, signed a memorandum of understanding back in 1994, and it was kept secret. It was kept secret for many years, and it was only recently revealed on a FOIA request. It was kept secret, and basically it was all about the DOJ. Now, the DOJ is concerned with law enforcement, with the local police stations, with the FBI, with the sheriff's departments, right? And these guys decided to hold hands with the Department of Defense to engage in joint development of certain non-lethal weapons. Now, that was the term they were using in those days. But they involved and included a whole bunch of electromagnetic weapons, acoustic neuroweapons, etc., about which information has slowly started to trickle out about the kind of weapons. So they have been. So our local police stations, our local law enforcement, is in receipt of these once classified military weapons. And now they are, as you used the word normalize a little while ago, and I think that's what they've been working to do. They're trying to normalize the use of these weapons as technical surveillance, as part of their roster of surveillance devices and weaponry. but they're being very secretive about it, and they're refusing to divulge information about it. I have tried to get information from the local Massachusetts Fusion Center and been denied. And I don't know any other journalist who's had any better luck, because then it would be in the press. Everybody would know about it. So local law enforcement, the DOJ, the FBI, are keeping it very tight to themselves as to what weapons they have on the ground and what's being used. At the same time, you've got the DOD running military operations other than war on our continental US on the ground. So there's a whole bunch of things going on. There's non-lethal weapons testing going on. The US Air Force is involved, the US Marine Corps, who are very much behind it. The Joint Non-Lethal Weapons whatever they called it, not conference, but department or organization or whatever, comes from the USMC. That's the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps of the US Navy began the whole joint non-lethal weapons enterprise. So you've got all of these, if you go back and look at the contracts, you've got all of these military divisions running non-lethal weapons testing operations on Americans inside America, but redacting it in their statements of work, in their RFPs, if you get a hold of some of them, and I've looked at some of them. So they won't tell you where and who they are testing on. So, and at the same time, you've got reports from the field coming, many people speaking like you are speaking, Dr. Ber, telling me and telling some other people that, they're being hit with energy weapons. So you just have to put two and two together and think, well, who's doing this? Is it the DOD? Is it the US Marine Corps, with a weapons testing contract? Is it the FBI? Is it the CIA? So is it technical surveillance? Is it DARPA? So these are our questions. And then from this world, this very world of military and intelligence, you have Mr. Giordano showing up, and refusing to address. By the way, your question does offer a kind of a milestone and a landmark, because he answered the question in the affirmative. But up to this point, he has refused to address this. He has poo-pooed it, Apart from Dr. Robert Duncan, there has been nobody from military or intelligence who has said, yes, these weapons are being used. Gerald Susby, FBI whistleblower, has given us great information on, yes, they are being used. He's given us that information, that disclosure, but not Dr. Giordano. He's denied it. Dr. Rafael Yuste, whom I interviewed, and he's chief of neuroscience at Columbia University and rather famous, I asked him this question too about people from the field reporting this, and he said, oh, those people must all have some kind of mental problem. So lovely man, great neuroscientist, but that's what he told me.
I understand. What you just told me, I respectfully listening to this. I'm trying not to make any speculative statements. I really, what I want to happen is an official investigation. I want congressional oversight. So FBI, who's supposed to investigate and not investigating, it has to be forced to investigate and give us real answer, because it is a public safety question. This is my position, and I don't want to guess who is doing it, why they're doing it. I want the government to investigate it and to protect us civilians suffering and diagnosed with this condition. This is just like Dr. Giordano said, this is no longer a possibility. This is a reality. Then if this is a reality, where's the public conversation? Where is it? Why none of the journalists, none of the mainstream outlets are even talking about the fact that civilians do suffer from what they call Havana Syndrome or directed energy and neuro weapons? That's what I demand.
Yes, and absolutely brilliant that you are making this point and making this demand, because I think this is, we are sort of at a news moment in time with your question and with his answering the question. And I think with this podcast and with my reporting of this podcast shortly after, hopefully I will write an article about it shortly after. I think that the information is going to get out in the public, that there has now been quote unquote official, calling Dr. Giordano official, acknowledgement of the use of energy weapons on civilians inside America, inside the USA. So that is huge. And as you say, nobody has reported it yet, but we are reporting it. You are reporting it, and I will report it for you. And as for speculation, I totally understand. Leave it to me. I'll do the speculating because I've been looking at the subject a long time. I've lost patience with all these people who refuse to address it publicly. But your point of view is, let's look at the facts. Let's look at the fact that people indeed are reporting it. That is also my point of view. There are people reporting this. People should be taken seriously, not fobbed off as psychiatric cases. People should be listened to. People should be, and this is the other thing, because as a doctor, perhaps you can address this. People who are being hit with these energy weapons are actually being harmed by them, right? Physically, not just brain damage, but physical damage. Microwave weapons are causing radiation burns. They're causing all kinds of illnesses. They're causing arthritis. They're causing joint troubles. They're causing heart troubles. So many people have been reporting different kinds of ailments. So isn't this a medical issue? Shouldn't they get medical help?
They should, but we need to know, we need to stop these attacks. One of the things that Dr. Hoffer recommended to me is vestibular rehabilitation. Well, I can tell you that it did not work because I'm being hit every day.
Oh, so yes,
like
absolutely. That's a great point.
Concussion every day and trying to recover. And as time goes, the time of recovery getting longer and longer. I'm literally on the medical leave with the diagnosis of Havana Syndrome. The insurance company approved it. This is a.
I'm sorry, you were interrupted just now. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you were just frozen out right now, so I didn't hear what you said. If you don't mind reporting it. All right. So you were saying that it's not just an issue of medical treatment. The attacks have to stop because you're getting repeated attacks, right? Which make things worse.
Yes. So my cognitive health has declined over the last 2.5 years. My vestibular function has become much worse. My cognitive function is declining. I have a hard time forming new memories. It is affecting my. I basically gave up on my career. For the last 5 months, I've been on the medical leave with my full diagnosis. Sounds traumatic brain syndrome and vestibular disorder due to directed energy exposure, also known as Havana Syndrome. This is my complete diagnosis from Dr. Hoffer and from my neurologist who diagnosed me with traumatic encephalopathy, because just like people getting repeated concussion, you're familiar with the expression immaculate concussion. This feels exactly like you've been concussed every time you get attacked. And then you have a recovery time, and before you fully recover, you get attacked again, and you basically you become dysfunctional, live in constant mental fog, mental fatigue, all the things. It's like your brain aged 30 years over the last two and a half years, and it's progressing. So I'm on the medical leave. This diagnosis has been approved by insurance company. This is no longer some kind of mysterious condition. This is just like Dr. Giordano said, this is reality.
Thank you for spelling that out. And, the point that you make is a very valid one, that it's pointless talking about medical treatment that's needed when, in fact, the attacks are continuing, the assault is continuing with these weapons, these unknown weapons that are being directed at you. These are remote access weapons, as you pointed out. They're directed at you remotely, but they are kind of precision hitting your head, your brain, your skull, etc., and creating all of these medical issues and problems. Now, you said that what really needs to be done is an investigation has to be forced. The FBI needs to investigate. Okay, now, again, as I say, I've been looking at this for such a long time, and it's so difficult to know what the way forward is for all of us, because as long as the government refuses to acknowledge it, refuses to tell the parties involved to stop it, then it continues. So the question is, how do you get the government to do that? How do you get the government to get this to stop? What do you have any suggestions? How should we close out this interview?
I think it should become a political issue. I think that every elected official needs to be asked to state his or her position on the use of neural weapons among civilians. And yes, maybe the public awareness is not there, but we have to start somewhere. This issue is extremely important, and I think that me personally, this coming election season, I will every official that wants my vote will have to state that position publicly, and what will he or she do for people affected by the use of neural weapons.
That's actually a very unusual approach and very interesting one, because you're saying not just make it public, but hold the politicians' feet to the fire, so to speak. Make this a public issue such that they have to address it, and they have to take a stance on it. And they have to take the stance of wanting to protect the populace, right? The civilian populace, from this kind of arbitrary assault.
If somebody says, it's not an important issue to protect civilians from damaging their brain, that's not a good statement. That's not somebody I would vote for. And people who are well informed, and I think that we have some very well informed voters who will influence others, we have to make it a political issue. Can you hear me?
I can now. You froze out, and your video is still frozen. Okay. Now it's back. Back. That's a remarkable and I think powerful and important statement, really, that we have to get our politicians to see the nature of the situation for what it is, the gravity of the situation, and demand that it indeed be addressed. Now, remember that this is within the context of the fact that the Justice Department, the Defense Department have permitted the development of these weapons, and their operation in certain circumstances. That is known at this point, even if it's not published too much in media. We have their documents to prove it, to speak to it. So that's the atmosphere. So in a sense, it's a case of getting the Senate Intelligence Committee. I spoke to Kirk Wiebe, NSA whistleblower, about these very problems. And he said one of the people to look at are those committees, write to them, connect with them, the Senate Intelligence Committee. I think there's a Justice Committee, Senate Justice Committee, etc. Let them know, because they're the ones who are in close contact with the intelligence agencies and with the military divisions, and have actually given their permissions for some of these classified operations inside the country. So this is the point at which people in the country need to recognize that these classified operations are causing great harm and great violation of basic human rights. And if people do not speak out and speak out together, they will continue because they're being normalized. These operations are being normalized. This weaponry is being normalized. And nobody should stand for it.
Correct. I completely agree with you, Ramola.
Did you, as we close, perhaps we should make a mention of the recent news also from Canberra, the Canberra protests in Australia. I don't know if you saw my article, which I published yesterday. LRADs and other kinds of microwave weapons and possibly aerosol chemtrails as well have been used on the protesters. And this actually came up to the Australian Parliament. So there is, to me, it seems like that's another way in which they're beginning to surface their use of these weapons.
Yes.
What is your comment on that?
This is definitely just one aspect of using these neuro weapons. But to me, the issue of persistent daily use that completely changes quality of life of people. This is quite a radical idea. And yes, every little bit helps. I understand that United States possess very similar equipment and has been used on protesters. So public awareness definitely helps. But I'm waiting for a serious public conversation when smart journalists realize the gravity of the situation and make it a public, it makes it into the ether of public conversation. It really has to be. It's that important. If you ask somebody, what do you think about the sort of the sanctity of the human brain? Would you allow somebody to access it remotely, to damage it, to modify it somehow? People would say absolutely not. And the next statement should be, well, it is happening. And that's how we're gonna, that's how we should be talking about it.
Brilliant. And that is a very positive and powerful and signposting kind of note to perhaps end this conversation on this afternoon. Dr. Len Ber, thank you so much for coming forward and for sharing your experience, your understanding of the medical context over here, and for actually standing up and asking Dr. Giordano that question at the conference and having your question accepted and presented, because that doesn't happen at these conferences, as I know from my own experience. So thank you for taking those steps to educate those people who conveyed your question to Dr. Giordano. And thank you again for the wisdom in helping us see what might be the next steps for people to take.
I really appreciate being on your program, and I respect what you do. I respect the caliber of people that you interview. You mentioned Robert Duncan, who I am a big admirer of. He's a brilliant man, and thank you for all your coverage, and thank you for the interest that you pay to this topic. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Len Ber. I will continue to keep this topic and this subject under discussion and try to keep the public conversation going, at least within the limited sphere of the people who, view my podcast and read my articles. I'm not sure who they are, but some people do. So for that reason, I'm going to keep doing what I do, and very grateful for people like you who are unafraid to come forward to speak their minds, present their experience, and share it, because in a sense, we are one large family, and everybody needs to know what's happening to each other. And we won't know if we don't speak about it. And many people are afraid to come forward, and speak about it. But so therefore, people who whistleblow and people who speak about it are very, very important at this point. So thank you.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.